stolen valor, and it was challenged, and finally the Supreme Court said unless you're making money off of this and pretending that you received this medal, that would be in violation and you could be running afoul of the federal law. So they're not illegal to hold, and again, this is a replica. This is not the exact one that's awarded, but in the casement and this sort of thing, we're going to try to have that on display at Luke Days, encased with the medals he would have gotten, including the Purple Heart. Everyone who died does get a Purple Heart. Kind of an odd deal, but that's the way it works. The other thing is I've got a little vial, fairly good sized vial of sand. We did this in Hawaii. We did it on our trip to Omaha Beach. And then I'm going to show you a little video here before we get started, but we'll do the pledge, and I'm going to select you. If I could kind of show, and you're going to have to look back here, show of hands, who's been here for the first time? Bob? Jerry? Linda? Jerry?
No, we were here before.
No, we were here before? Okay. Bob and I went to OCS together, graduated together. He's always in the Veterans Day Parade with me and drives, is willing to do anything I ask him to do, so been a tremendous help. Jerry and Linda are fellow bakers. We lived in Wickenburg for a number of years. He was the operations officer for the downtown branch, so every time something went wrong out in Siloam, I'd say, Jerry, I think I screwed up. What do I need to do to undo this? And Jerry would tell me how to. When we took the sand off of Omaha Beach, which is one of the first slides you're going to see, I just did it, and I had enough sand, and so then later on in the year we had a chance to go to the 75th anniversary in Hawaii and at Pearl Harbor, and we went there. The Arizona was there. Wanda Sartain brought the Arizona, and I mean, what a beautiful display. And there were probably, I'd say, close to 100 vets. And Sandra, to use the microphone, you're going to have to come over here and sit next to me. There were probably 100 vets there, and we got a chance to, again, go over to the memorial. This is actually turret 3 that is up toward the, I guess, the north side of the ship.
Pointy. The pointy end? The pointy end.
The pointy end. So, anyhow, it's hard to tell the pointy end from this stage. But I had asked, Rodriguez is the guy's name, I think, that is the head curator for the...
I think it's Gonzalez.
No, it's not Gonzalez. He's the guy that's on Channel 8 that does anything they have to do with Pearl Harbor. You're going to see him on there. And I asked him, because he's been in a couple events we were with on him, and I said, I've got some sand here from Omaha Beach. I like to spread it over the Arizona. And he says, well, it's one of those things you don't ask for permission, you just do. And I'm figuring it's still leaking oil, so I mean, how much damage can the sand do? So, this is what I'm going to play you. Hopefully, if this works, it worked at home.
Yeah, the Arizona's supposed to be sinking too.
Really?
Oh, really?
That's why they're not doing a memorial thing over there anymore. It's going to be in Phoenix over here now.
Oh, wow. I saw the Arizona. Oh, wow. We didn't even hear that. That's all.
What's that to do?
Obtained from the youth Omaha Beach in Normandy. That's all from the survivors. Those men that gave their lives in D-Day. So that was the following day. As a matter of fact, some friends that we had met and struck up a friendship with, this doctor out of Indianapolis and stuff, and his wife, were remarking that some man brought some sand from Omaha Beach. And I said, "Hey, that was the man." And he says, "No, it's this fellow up here, sitting up here in the front of the bus." So I went up there and I talked to him. Lord and behold, he 2 years earlier had taken sand. He did the same thing over the middle of it. So great minds. Okay. Now, Sam, I'm not as cogent on this as I need to be. How do I get this thing back to where I've got the thumb drive into it? Maybe I minimize it. Exit full screen. Okay. Okay, here we go. And Mom, we need your beautiful voice here. Did you bring your diary?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I don't think I need it.
You don't think she needs it? Okay, well, that's good. None of these are with at Tahiti with little bikini walking folks, so none of it is restricted. I'll let her start and explain a little bit about ACES.
Okay, our youngest daughter lives in Boston, and she works for a company called ACIS, and it's American Council on International Studies. But what it is, it's an educational travel company, mostly for high school students. They really don't want to take old people anymore because us old people have too many other plans and we want to change plans and we're too picky, blah, blah, blah. Well, we got to go anyway. So we were with these wonderful, probably there were like 36 total of us, including about 4 or 5 teachers, the 2 of us and the rest were students. Then they were from North Carolina and Alabama. They were wonderful kids. We were so proud of them. I never heard a foul word. Nobody was ever late on all those mornings. They were nicely dressed, interested in everything we did. They were just really neat kids. Anyway, this is us just when we got to the bus outside of the airport in Paris. So this is us beginning our trip in June of 2016. So what, about 16 months ago?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, we traveled right straight to the D-Day area, and this is Point du Hoc, and Bill's going to tell you about some of the interesting things we saw there. How many of you know a lot about D-Day, that whole Normandy beach? A lot of the amazing things those servicemen did.
If you find any flagrant errors, Maddie, tell me, okay?
I'm gonna let you tell it.
Okay. This is a shot of the bunkers that were lined along in there, and you're going to see the ground is kind of irregular. There's a reason for that, and we provided the reason on the morning of June 6th. We put a lot of ordnance in there. Point du Hoc, you know, when you think of this and you don't kind of look at the territory as much, you think, well, why don't you just avoid it if it's heavily armed? Just work around it. The problem is the schematic of the point goes out, and that's another thing too. The length of the landings on D-Day. Well, I'll throw it out before I answer the question. What was the distance between the ending and the beginning of the landing sites and the zones? That's for the Allies and us. Anybody have any idea?
The length of the beach.
Length of the beach. 40 miles. 40 miles. And Point du Hoc, it actually protrudes out there. And when you think that if you're going to be up against heavy guns and a lot of machine gun fire, you had no other choice. You had to really attack that particular area, and that's what we did. So this is some of the bunkers. You're going to see a couple of others here. This is the kid that's standing now. Remember, this happened back in 1944, so there's got to be some infill here, but he's standing in one crater. So we must have had some pretty good sized ordnance there that create those big holes. You know, and if you weren't hearing impaired as a German when you left that area, it's a miracle. You were dead, yeah. You didn't add more than a hearing problem. This gives you a little bit of a schematic. Up here, if you'll point that, because I don't have it. See where the... Here.
Yeah, why don't you do that? 'Cause
This is the
I
monument.
got a parade to do on 28th too, so.
This is the monument. That monument is where we had taken the original picture where it says point to Hawk. Okay? And that's how far down, and it's a straight climb up. The lieutenant colonel that was supposed to lead that part got cold feet the day before, and he says, I can't do it. I can't lead him. So Rudder, which is the next slide, is the guy that took over for him. He was his supervisor, and he said, well, it falls to me. If you can't do it, I've got to do it. So this is kind of looking down from the monument.
Bill, can I help you out just a second?
Sure.
I've got a laser pointer up here for you.
Where is that thing?
It's, excuse me, it's under that sheet of paper.
Oh, okay. There we go.
And if you'll take and put this in your USB drive there, now if you just click right, and here's your laser pointer right here.
Okay, good.
There you go.
Thank you.
Look right. Okay, there you go. There it is. Okay. You're going the wrong way. You've been pressing stuff.
No, I just have the pointer. Oh.
Okay.
Is that one okay?
Yeah, that's good. This, we're holding up a newspaper from up at Munns Park. That's supposed to be published in a little local paper. Where does the paper go? You know, well, go. They went to Point to Hawk. So it's a big marble area. Do the next slide. That Colonel Rudder, James E. Rudder, was the one that actually led him up the hill. And literally, you have to follow me, which is the credo of an infantry soldier. And literally, he climbed that wall with others and inspired others to come up that steep grade. Interesting enough, when they got to the top, the guns were gone. There were no guns. And to this day, nobody really understands why there were no guns. They were moved about 5 miles back from that location, and a staff sergeant actually found them in the woods. They were all lined up. And he took thermite grenades, and then he had to borrow some thermite grenades, and put them down each one of the cannons there, each one of the long guns, and destroyed the long guns. Go ahead, next. Here you can see, as you're going down in, a lot of tight quarters down there. These things are so overbuilt that when they first tried to destroy them or get rid of them, it was virtually impossible. There's no way to do that. Go ahead.
You know what, the thing that just shocked me was the amount of iron and steel and concrete that the Germans put into all these, because these are all over the place. And you know, it's not really close to Germany, so they had to get all that equipment and carry all that and build all this stuff, not ever knowing if we'd even attack there. But they are just massive bunkers. I couldn't believe the amount of steel in those things.
Sandra, did you guys ever did they allow you to go inside them?
Yes.
Next picture.
Yeah, you're gonna see that. This is from inside the bunker, and this is their view. This is what they would have seen, kind of looking out there. And you'll see in the movies, for when they do reenactments and movies on that invasion, when they first woke up in the morning, they were just shocked. The whole ocean was filled full of ships. This is where one of the big guns would have been, looking out. But see the layers, when she's talking about all the steel that went in there, And this was mostly built by the French, not the Germans. Remember, we're going to see a concentration camp, and I'm going to explain a little bit about that, but Germans didn't have a lot of muscle and power. They basically said, you worker, this is the way it works.
Whether you like it or not.
That's correct. You wanted to live. This slide here is, did we miss anything?
What's the next one?
Okay, this is a German cemetery in France, and their markers are slightly different. You can see the little groupings in there. See that mound to the very rear? That's pretty much burial of soldiers, and I've forgotten if there's a number of them that are buried in that mass grave, but that's what that is. That's a mass grave of unidentifiables. Next one should show the tombstone there, and that's how they identify as best they can. Now this is very interesting. You'll find there were no landing areas in here, and the landing areas were pretty much under British and Canadian control if they had taken the ports. The problem is the ports were mined, there was no way to offload the tanks, the support vehicles, and so what they knew this ahead of time. So what they did is they had these concrete barges that they brought close enough after the invasion, and they sunk them in place. So that's what a lot of our supplies traveled over, and including tanks, to get on board Omaha Beach. The other interesting thing is we tried to put, I call them floaties, but a flotation device on the Sherman tanks. And that didn't work out too well. A lot of them sunk before they got in there. If you remember, the weather that day was not very well and very good. As a matter of fact, there's another story that Eisenhower had written 2 letters, one of success, we've successfully landed, and the other one apologizing for such a disaster, because he had no idea whether or not this was going to be successful. Do you have any comment? This is again another part of those, and again they're so massive that they didn't really remove it. This is low tide, incidentally. Go ahead again. See how big these things are? Look at the little humans down in there.
Oh,
I guess we're in order. Okay, this is, go ahead.
This is the French town of Aromanche, and there's a big, I don't think we have any pictures of it, but there's a big 360-degree theater that you go in. It was a wonderful presentation. It brought tears to your eyes, but it was very well done, and it's right in this town, and it's right, I think, having ice cream or something, right across the street from these Jeeps. And this British man and his wife just happened to sit down right with us, he was 10 years old when the war was over, and he was talking about what it was like to live during those war years, and they were so scared. But the sentence that I remember that he said, the happiest day of his life was the day that the Americans came. And he said those American soldiers gave those kids gum and chocolate, and they were so thankful and so happy because they knew they were going to be okay once the Americans came. It was really neat. And oh, I'm going to ask you, can anybody name all 5 beaches of D-Day? Let me see if we can do it. There's Omaha, Utah, Juneau, Sword, one more, Silver and Gold. One of them was Canadian, 2 were British, and Utah and Omaha were ours. So there were 3 nations, really, at D-Day.
What is really kind of funny, most of the military hardware was left at Dunkirk for the English, as you recall. They escaped. I think they saved over 400,000 troops, which we used again in the war later on for the invasion. And why Hitler didn't release the panzers on them, I have no idea. That's still kind of a big question. But But most of the hardware that they drove around in, including when they tried to go for a bridge too far, was items and tanks that we had, we built for them. A lot of very interesting stories. Did you switch that? Okay. This is
This is the American Cemetery at Omaha Beach. And I think there were 5,000 graves there, but you can see it is immaculate. How they keep these grounds perfectly mowed around all those crosses, it's just amazing. It was just perfect. Really, and the kids, the students went way back in the back, and I mean, they were very interested in reading some of these crosses.
the other thing is, if you can look closely enough, it's not showing up very well. And at the latter part of our program, you're going to see the one where Frank Luke is buried in. But each one of these is Italian marble. And you'll see on the lower left-hand side, there is an inscription. And unless they are a Medal of Honor, which is really designated with gold leaf, then they all look like they're blank crosses, but they're not. And when we went to a couple of the cemeteries, they asked what states we were from, and they could tell us where to go and so the section to go to see them, and even names. Next. This is, yeah, this is basically the same part of the cemetery, but on both sides it shows where the battlefields were and where the landings were for Normandy in that area, and how the progression of the battle occurred. They're in a relief on both sides of the wall there. The other thing that's unique about this is the French, way back during World War II, when these were being constructed, the French actually deeded all of this over to the United States. When you're on this cemetery, you are on United States soil. The reason why that's important, if you commit a crime, the French are not involved, the FBI is involved. I point this out. This is a slide for Bob and Leland and anybody that's been connected to the Guard. You know, we oftentimes overlook the National Guard. These are National Guard units that actually were involved in the assault there at Omaha Beach. And you'll see there's Virginia, there's Maryland, there's District of Columbia. There's a lot of units and a lot of folks that were a part of that. There's a picture back in the back, which is interesting. We've got a lot of photos that we brought with us. They're going to be part of our display for Luke Days. But Harry S. Truman is in his little hard hat, and he was a captain and an artillery officer out of Missouri, and also was involved with the World War I. So anyhow, this is Omaha Beach. This is where we actually picked up the sand. You can see the tide is out. Now, when you're looking at Point du Hoc, being kind of going out that direction, this is not where Point du Hoc is, but when you look at that and you're under a full pack, and if you can imagine those iron four-piece crosses buried into the sand there, and that was to entrap not only the tanks, anti-tank, but also any kind of landing vehicles, and we lost a lot of folks that way. That was a lot of territory to have to cover and not be shot. So the death rate and the wounded rate was extremely high. The machine gun, can anybody tell me what the machine gun was, the standard machine gun for the Germans was that was so effective?
MG-42.
MG-42, yeah. Did it have a special sound?
Yeah, they used to call it Hitler's buzzsaw.
Okay. But it was extremely accurate and very seldom with jam. So your livelihood was in someone else's hands. But you can imagine once you're left off of the beach, you say, I've got to go that direction with no cover. Next. That's the other side of it. These are the villages, really pretty much, with some spiffing up, obviously, because they got shelled. But a lot of the villages are right along the water line there with the mountain in the back. But you can see how far back that goes. And imagine now, you're not looking at 40 miles, you're only looking maybe at a couple of miles. Okay, this is my Italian Frenchie. I told her, I said, if we get to Paris, I do want to take you to the Arc de Triomphe. Pretty good, she said. We happened to be there on a weekend where European soccer matches were being held. So we had tons and tons of people, and also armed guards, which we're going to show you a picture of. This was kind of, can you go back? This was, and I heard, and I could be wrong on this, so if I'm wrong, just correct me. But I think at one point in time when Hitler overtook Paris, he actually purposely marched his troops right through the middle of that arch. And there's a picture of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. So if you want to kind of stick it in the eye of the French, that's how you do it. This is a main monument there. We actually got it to go up in it. We'll show you those pictures. These are the guards, and this is a no BS army. They got automatic weapons, they're locked and loaded, and we had no problem during the time we were there. You don't see this on any other picture, but these are the reliefs inside, and it's very, very decorative. A lot of money was put into this. And this is my little French Italian. And we're up at the top, and they didn't have this here when I was here in Paris in the 70s. But apparently too many people were jumping off up there, so I put those up. This is kind of looking in between the spikes. There are several roads that come in there. That's kind of like a massive old-fashioned traffic circle. When I was there in the 70s, they actually had policemen there with white gloves, and they were directing traffic, but they had a useless job because nobody was paying any attention to them. So when you're looking down, it is so entertaining to see he's going to get run over. The other thing that was unusual is that women would drive these little Vespas or scooters, I don't know if they were Vespas or not, and they would sit side saddle on these little Vespas in these fancy attired dresses and drive around Paris. And I saw no dead people along the side of the road. It's kind of interesting. This is kind of looking down there. See, who's in control? Now the change from the 70s into today, the policemen are gone. If you can't control anything, why in the heck are you endangering your own life?
Hey, Bill?
Sure.
Are you on top of the ark? Okay.
Yes.
I was just going to say, we climbed up there, and we need a round of applause because it's 286 steps. I'm just kidding about the applause.
Okay, next. Those are the stairs.
And it's circular, as you can tell.
Oh my God.
But you know, that color reminds me of how sick I was when I got up there. Next.
Wow, I get dizzy.
This is the Tomb of the Unknown that's right directly below the arch. And obviously it was built memorial for World War I. But Hitler. Now this, most people will recognize this. This is Notre Dame, or Notre Dame. Okay. It was a wet and rainy day, and I thought, man, getting in the line, we're going to get soaked by the time we got in there. It moves pretty quickly. Now we didn't throw in all the slides, but they were also very well armed at that location too. It isn't too many steps from where I stood to take that picture that you're not going to run into a building in back of you. Some of these things is kind of like when you look at the pyramids in Egypt. They look like they're out by themselves. You turn the other direction, the city's right there. Yeah, that's kind of what you've got here. It was very worthwhile to get. And Mom, I'm going to let you take over on this one.
This really isn't anything about military. It's just a picture of Montmartre, where Sacré-Cœur is. This is it's not so much artist as it used to be, but this was the artist colony, and it's more on a rise. I don't know what direction from downtown Paris, but it was just so picturesque. We thought we'd put that picture in there.
Hold on to it. Go ahead to the next one.
Oh boy, this have any of you seen this all lit up in Paris? It sparkles. It's like a what do you call, sparkler. It just twinkles every night when they turn on the lights. It twinkles. The whole thing just twinkles for about 10 minutes.
And music.
And music.
And the soccer ball.
Oh yeah, there was a soccer ball. See it hanging there inside because of this soccer tournament.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Before we go to that, go back to that real quick. Hitler had a couple of different ideas of something he wanted to do. One of the things he wanted to do, and remember, Germany, probably very similar to Japan, didn't have a lot of natural resources. Hitler's idea was to take that tower down for building aircraft. That was not successful, obviously. The other thing is he gave a direct order to his general before they vacated Paris. He wanted Paris, and he specifically told his general in charge there, level this city, period. And obviously, most of the generals knew we're probably not going to win this thing, and I don't want to be pinned to this, that I destroyed Paris. So what happened to him, I have no idea. It stunted his military career, I'm sure. This is another cemetery. This one here is World War I. None of these cemeteries that we visited, incidentally, Bellawood, none of these cemeteries are commingled, having both World War I and World War II veterans in them. This is strictly World War I. Now, we were a late entrant into World War I. So when you're seeing all these crosses, and the order of battle back in those days, because you were dealing with trench warfare as you went right over the top and in the machine gun fire, I mean, it was very, very deadly. So you're going to see a lot of crosses. These are all Americans. It has nothing to do with the French or anybody, any other countries. And we did find in Arizona. Next. Two. This fellow's a corporal. 5th Regiment, U.S. Marine Corps 2nd Division. Jesse, do you know anybody that? Okay. Well, you wouldn't know them, but Jesse's got a few years, but so do most of us. Okay, you talk about the cemetery.
Okay, this is the one with that. Okay, this is in Luxembourg, and this is another huge, perfectly manicured cemetery. This is World War II, this one.
Next. This actually has to do with the Battle of, in the Ardennes Forest, known as the Battle of the Bulge. This was probably the largest single action in Europe. And this is where basically German is their last thrust to kind of cut off the Americans and gain a port that they lost during the invasion, as long as they could capture enough fuel, and of course things didn't go according to plan. The reason why this is important is, next, there are thousands of graves here, and they're all facing the other direction, which is interesting. George Patton, which is your next slide, and I wanted her to catch me there saluting his grave. He was actually buried in the middle of this graveyard. And his wife, when she found that out, she said, well, he would prefer to be the head of his troops. Well, unfortunately, they were already buried. And so they said, well, we'll put him up here toward the building. So his site is all by itself, right up there by the relief we just looked at. And the reason why it's kind of actually looking at his soldiers' rear ends.
Yeah. Can we zoom? Is this zoom? Can we know how to zoom? This, will this make this zoom, the picture zoom, Doc?
Yes, go to full, that arrow on the lower right side, you click on that, it'll go to full screen.
Uh-oh.
Well, yeah, that's fine. Then do your next one, because that's a better picture. And he died unceremoniously in a car accident, and And it was a big relief, and there's all kinds of books written up on whether or not that was set up by the Russians or whatever. The Russians had a big fear of him because, kind of like over in the battle with Korea, with MacArthur and wanting to invade into China, Patton was very forceful in saying, hey, let's take care of the Russians. We're going to have to meet up with them sooner or later. We're not going to be their friends. And how prophetic. This is inside the chapel. Each one of these major cemeteries has a chapel, and they're beautifully decorated. And probably on the World War II side, they get visitors every day, but World War I side, they do not. Next.
Oh,
General McCullough.
ask if they know the story about this guy.
Do you know this? Do you know this story here, Maddie?
Which one is this?
This is on General McCullough.
Oh, Macron?
This is in Bastogne,
Oh,
Belgium.
101st Airborne?
Yes. Well, 101st, actually 82nd was the first, I think, and then the 101st came in as relief, I believe. Anyhow, this is General McCullough. He's the guy that basically, when the Germans told him, hey, you're surrounded, you better surrender, and he said, nuts. That's it.
Nuts.
So go ahead to the next one. And this is a picture with General Patton riding in the front and McCullough in the rear at the Nuts Cave, which is where their headquarters were. This is an interesting site because you're going to see some slides that follow where they've got a huge museum in there of tanks, Russian tanks, our tanks, German tanks, a lot of stuff. You could spend hours and hours there. There were several floors. Next. Now this is the forest, the Ardennes forest, and see how thick this was. When the Germans decided to come through there with their tanks, anybody that would look at this forest and this boundary would say, this is nuts. This is crazy. But that's the reason why it was such a surprise. The 82nd Airborne and other Army units were actually sent to this village. It's right outside of here, that for R&R to recover. They had just been battlefield worn, and so they were getting rest and relaxation.
I was just going to point out, the man in the orange vest was our leader. He's British, and our bus driver was from Belgium. I think his name was Hugo or something. The other guy. This is Tim.
Next. These are actually dugouts, and I don't know if they've been redug and refilled in or whatever, but these were the emplacements that we had, that we actually occupied just as a flimsy defensive perimeter so that you wouldn't be overrun by, a handful of folks. In the Battle of the Bulge. This is two locals trying to pretend that they're occupying this space, so I don't know what the scary look is. This is one of those famous photographs. This is going to Nuremberg. That was kind of our next stop before we got into Berlin. And this is him going up the Zeppelin Tribune to address the crowd there. They had massive rallies in the first part of the war until it was evident that they were not going to go any further and they were being pushed back in Russia, that Hitler did a lot of these rallies. And then after that occurred, he basically was out of view. He only did one or two addresses afterwards. Really kind of a change in behavior. Next. This shows, and I don't know, Maddie or anybody that might know who actually blew up that Nazi symbol at the end of the war?
I'm not sure. It was on the History Channel this month.
Was it the Russians? Because I don't think we were there.
I think you're right. It was the evidence.
Yeah. Anyhow, they had a very accurate artilleryman that took out that round symbol with the swastika on it. That building is still there. You're going to see some slides and pictures of that with us. I'm standing on that same place. And right above where that door is, which is the center of this whole Ephesus, is where that symbol was. It's relatively thin. There's not too much in back of it. It only goes back maybe 10 or 12 feet, but it looks imposing from this side. And this is where actually Hitler spoke from, is this little platform here. You'll see, now the stadium actually, you can't see it from this picture, but there's huge concrete stands on both the left and the right side of this picture. And these are temporary buildings or whatever that's in here. They use it for other purposes today, obviously. That's what they look like. And I filmed it from the side and the back, and somebody was telling me those are bathrooms. Somebody in this group told me they were bathrooms?
They almost look like flat
I couldn't think something more appropriate for the emperor of the great leader. This is where the trials were held in Nuremberg. And that was on the 3rd floor. We tried to get in there, and some grouchy old guy wouldn't let us in. Busload of eager people on history, and they wouldn't let us into that site. This building was in pretty good shape. They could get it in shape for the trials. This is where Goring, who was the highest ranking officer at that time, committed suicide the day before he was to be hanged. Goring was very slick. I'm going to have you talk a little bit about Nuremberg. Go to the next slide. Talk a little bit about this ancient city.
Okay, this is travel log time. This is like a magical, I love fairy tale stuff, and this is the old part of the original city. It's all walled. You can see it's like castles. It's like late medieval times. And if you've heard of the artist Albrecht Dürer from the 1500s, his house, I'm wishing we had gone through it. His house is right inside here. He's a famous artist. But this was just wonderful. There wasn't anything, military about this part. I will say that our tour guide, that Tim, the British man, did tell us that Hitler considered Nuremberg to be the most German of cities. And he didn't explain if he meant like this old original section that you're looking at, or if he meant the thing as a whole, because there was so much Nazi stuff in Nuremberg. Anyway, this was, oh my gosh, it was just so neat. Oh, and we got to this area and I said, Bill, somebody has to take our picture with this background. It just looks like Disneyland, Fantasyland. Yeah, this is all inside the wall. Oh, and that's our group. Everybody's in there.
You see the old folks in the back?
Yep, we were by far the oldest people on the tour.
We had to do a lot of walking because you couldn't get a bus in here, and the place where we were staying, you had to haul your luggage, it seemed like 5 miles. Anyhow, one of the little gals in there, because the group kind of got elongated as you're going through the town and stuff, and we're walking by these 2 young girls, and the one young girl says to the other, I think we lost the old couple. And I said, which old couple are you talking about? Okay, this is not a battlefield, but in many respects it is. Buchenwald is outside of Berlin. Now you're going to see, this is a fairly typical camp. The Nazis actually had, the Nazi camps were run by the SS soldiers, period. SS had the primary responsibility, and there's other buildings we're going to show how this all came about, but all of them had ovens, but they were not all death camps, and there's a delineation here I'd like to make. A death camp is a camp, don't go any further at this point. Death camp is basically a camp set up like Auschwitz, Treblinka. There's several of them. Most of them were in Poland. Their whole mission was to destroy human beings, period. Most of the camps you see in Buchenwald is one of them, was actually a work camp, but they worked people to death. And when they found out that burning them was the easiest way to get rid of them instead of wasting ammunition to kill them, I mean, they used gas and it went on and on and on. So you're going to see some things here. This is the main gate as we went through. We've been to two of these camps. One was Dachau and then Buchenwald, but let's just go next. This is what the camp looked like back when it was taken over.
April 45 it says.
Yeah, April 45. And you know, folks knew that these things kind of existed, but until they really got in there, Eisenhower was extremely distressed is what he saw. And what he wound up doing is he took the local villagers, and he didn't care if you were in wheelchairs or on crutches or whatever, you went through that camp. He wanted to make sure that all the Germans that were around fully understood what they were involved with, which I thought was very was tremendous, because many of them I didn't know. We didn't know anything. You know what it's like when you burn hair on your arm? What it smells like? That'll never leave you. And Jesse's been in the battlefield. Several folks have been in the battlefield, and they'll tell you. Both of these gentlemen will tell you. And other gentlemen who have been in battle. Smells are the strongest piece of your memory that you've got, and they're not good. So you can't stand and be next and live next to a village and not understand what went on. This is actually where the ovens were. You can see the smokestack in the back. Next. That's self-explanatory. Next. These are the ovens. These are the front side of the ovens. This is where the bodies would have been loaded into. This would look when they were on kind of a rack, a metal rack, and then the ashes would fall below. Next, and this is where they would be cleaned out in the back. And again, that was not used to purposely kill people, but because people were dying in service. That's what they used it for. This is the stadium that was built for the 1936 Olympics. You remember in Berlin, and this is where, man, these are really battlefields, I guess, but anyhow, this is where he got so incensed at seeing a black man outrace white men that he left the stadium. Hitler did, yeah.
Jesse Owens.
Jesse Owens. I think he got 4 gold medals at Olympics, I believe. He lived here in the valley and died here. Anyhow, that's the bell that commemorates the 1936 Olympics. You like that red dot. Okay, Mom, what is this?
Reichstag?
It's the Reichstag. And if you remember, this has got a little history to it. Hitler purposely had set that on fire so he could blame the communist and the socialist and anybody else he didn't agree with, and accelerate his career. And I think it was burnt in, Eddie, I might need to use your brain on this, I think it was 36?
I think it was 36.
Sometime along that time. Anyhow, it was before the war. And this is where the Berlin Wall was, and of course it's gone.
That one?
Anyhow, it was established in 61, and you remember the wall came down, most of it did, in 89. So you could actually stand on the east and west side of Berlin. This is kind of interesting. You know how you have a mental vision of how big things are? This is not that big when you get right next to it. This is the Brandenburg Gates. And you'll notice the horses on top. Now, why this was not destroyed during the war, because if you recall, Berlin was pretty much leveled during the war. And it was captured by the Russians, and then of course had to give part of it up. I took this picture. Do you know what this might be?
Hitler's bunker.
Hitler's bunker, that is correct. In this vicinity, you would have seen in that non-squared off area would have been where both Adolf Hitler and his newly married bride would have been doused with gasoline and burned, their bodies burned. after they committed suicide in the bunker. The bunker, pardon?
Wasn't it Eva?
Eva Braun. What did I say?
Just says bride.
Oh, it's Braun, yeah, Eva Braun. Well, at least they didn't have another actress involved or something. They tried to destroy this bunker 6 times, ringed it with explosives. The problem is, it would go up. And so they said, it isn't here anymore. This is a sign, the next one, of what the bunker looked like underneath. But I mean, that thing was built.
So that land that you saw, that empty, it was right under there. Is where they committed suicide, and it's this sign is the only way you know. Otherwise, you wouldn't even know where you're walking over.
Next. This is the Luftwaffe headquarters, and this is where, what's his name? Göring, Hermann Göring headquarters would have been. Very nice. I mean, this is what it looked like back in the day, and it was one building that wasn't destroyed for some reason. This is one of the few remaining pieces of the wall. And of course, you can see how well it was built by the Soviets, because you can still see all the rebar. And we didn't take any samples or anything like that, but it runs right through there. This is Checkpoint Charlie. Charlie. Unfortunately, you've got people that are trying to get money off of this, and so you can't take no picture until you pay them. And we're bad folks. We took their picture anyhow. And then here it warns you about the sector, American sector, sector and German sector. Okay, Mom, start this one. The 1C Conference. This is right outside of Berlin. This was done in 1942. There was a conference held here by the German High Command. Next. And it's actually a private residence. And it's right on the lake. It's a beautiful place. Most of these places are very, very nice. Next. There's the lake. The reason why it's important, just hold it at that point. This is the room where the decision was made as far as the final solution. And everybody probably is aware of the final solution, what they were going to do with the Jews, because they weren't killing them off fast enough. And this is where Adolf Eichmann, who was captured in, was it Argentina? He was captured in Argentina by the Israelis and then brought back for trial. He was instrumental in a lot of the decision making and transportation. He had transportation expertise to get them to the death camps, which were in Poland. But that's where that decision was made. I thought it was made earlier than that, but I looked it up. It's 1942 when they held a conference here. Next. This is what the room looked like back in those days. And of course, they would have a long conference table there. Okay, this is Potsdam.
Yes.
This is where Truman, Churchill, and Stalin met right before the end of the war. I think it was July of 1945, just to discuss what was going to happen after the war, because everybody knew, except for, because Germany had already surrendered. Italy long before that had surrendered, so it was just Japan left, and they knew the end was near. So this is where they met.
This is also a private residence, and the reason why this is important is when Franklin Delano Roosevelt had passed away, and so this is the first time that Stalin had met Truman. And Truman had the big secret, because they knew the atom bomb actually worked and was tested. And he actually went over to Stalin and told him what had happened. And Stalin said, oh, good. Good. They knew everything, because they had a spy at the Manhattan Project, and he already knew about it. I wasn't supposed to take this picture, but because you guys were going to see this, I put my life on the line. This is actually the conference table in the room that they sat with their supporting dignitaries in back of them. And really it was kind of to divide up Europe too. Who's going to take this responsibility, that responsibility? Because if you remember toward the latter stages of the war, Roosevelt was so sick, we don't know kind of what transpired, and we probably gave up too much. But anyhow, that's the way history bounces. Now, this is kind of a transition. You're going to see this is where the last battle, I think, or main push was in World War I, the Verdun area. This is a fairly new museum. We did not go into that museum, but go ahead, Mom.
Okay, so that first part of our presentation is over with our trip with our daughter's company. This is when Bill and I drove at about 110, 120 miles an hour. The way they drive in Germany, it's horrible. But at least you get where you want to go fast. That's the good thing. Anyway, now we're in France to research by ourselves about Frank Luke Jr.
And we stopped at the museum here first, and a very nice museum. And this is the Argonne. Okay, she's my French interpreter here. These cemeteries are kept by the Monuments Society, American Monument Society, and they're immaculately kept. We were the only civilians there. We talked to one little young gal who was at the administrative building, and let's see what we have next here. This particular cemetery is where Frank Luke is buried. There are 14,000 one cemetery graves, strictly World War I, period. There are 9 recipients of the Medal of Honor buried here. As a matter of fact, most Medal of Honor recipients are not living. They're usually dead when they get the award afterwards. This is another view of the cemetery.
This, again, this was just immaculate with all those crosses.
Yeah, very well kept.
We don't know how they do it.
This is what she had on the wall, and I was reading, Frank Luke is right in there. I was reading about this, and I said, do you have a dossier on Frank Luke? And she said, it's funny you should mention it, because we went to the Library of Congress and requested everything they had on Frank Luke Jr. And I said, oh, you got that? Yeah. I said, can I see it? She said, sure, let me go get it. So she brings this thick folder back, and so I'm going through, and I think, man, I'd love to have a copy of this, and this, and this. I must have had 25 or 30 pages that were pulled out. And I asked her, I said, man, I'd love to have a picture of this. We're doing a museum. She says, okay. I said, we'll even pay you and for materials. She said, we don't accept money. I said, you're a governmental agency of the United States and you don't accept money? Have you got a problem here? She said, well, Mr. Simon, don't worry about it. I'll make the copies. I said, some of them are oversized. She said, we've got the capability. Don't worry about it. Why don't you visit the gravesite and come back and I'll have them ready for you. And sure enough, she did. So we made copies of all of that and gave that to Bill Luke, because that was his uncle. I'm sorry, Don Luke. Bill Luke is the father. He's passed away. But anyhow, we gave a copy, and then we kept our own copy and did the same thing to it. Next. Don Luke is using that for a publication they're putting together on Frank Luke Jr. The Frank Luke Jr., and you'll see Medal of Honor down there below there, that is in gold leaf. Again, all of those crosses that you see back there have inscriptions of the soldiers and when they died and the state they were from and so on and so forth. This is not the first place he was buried, incidentally. And we'll show you pictures of that. But before I go on, what's that?
The next year. Where's the date?
Well, next year, September 29th, 2018, is the 100th year anniversary of his service. And outside of what Sandy and I are doing and our board, no one in the state of Arizona, to my knowledge, is doing anything. Remember, this is the first Medal of Honor recipient as a pilot. You'd think Luke would be all over this, but they said, oh, you got that kind of a display? Okay, well, that's good. Anyhow, Frank Luke Jr. was kind of a loner, but he made a couple of friends over there. He was a miner. He was a fist fighter. Gosh darn, he did a number of different things before he got in the military.
Owned a saloon, co-owner of a saloon.
Co-owner of a saloon.
In
And-
Aho.
in Aho. But the bottom line is he was pretty much a loner. And the one thing that you can see throughout his brief military career is he didn't really like to follow orders too well. And on his last day of life, he shot down 3 balloons. 45 days later, the war ended from his death. So, and he did that in a stolen aircraft of his commander. So he was told specifically to stand down, you're going home. And there was an arrest warrant out for him, not publicized very much, when he was up doing his duty. He's of German heritage, but he really disliked the Germans. So just a little twist on that. Next. This is the chapel in there, and again, there, see the marble floors and everything? Very, very well done. So you can come in there and
Pay your respects.
pay your respects. Next. These are the units that participated in the war that are represented in the cemetery. Now, I took this picture to kind of give you an idea of the breadth. Again, you probably got 7,000 buried on one side, 7,000 buried on the other. That's the administrative building that we came from when we talked to this young gal about putting this information together. Next. This is how beautiful it is. This is just one of the roads that's leading in and out of the cemetery. The trees are overgrown, and just as a beautiful day. This is very interesting. This is, let me get it right here, I'm not a French person, Mervaux. Is that correct? Okay. I told Sandra when we saw this village, and you'll see the church has meaning here. And they're always in the middle of these towns. If you took a picture back in World War I and then took a picture in today, I don't think much has changed. Next. Yep.
Tell about the Commander Luke.
The former Commander Luke, the one that was there just before the one that is there now,
Ployce.
his last name was Ployce. It's unbelievable, but his mother was born in this village. What a coincidence.
This is this French chick that kept hanging around. Anyhow, the graveyards is fairly common to have local graveyards next to the church. This is actually the site in the area where most of the Germans, because it was a German-occupied village, were buried. And I didn't bring it with me tonight, but actually the area that he was buried in is very close to where she's standing. Most of the Germans were removed from that area, including Frank Luke. He was there for about 15 months. Another picture of the church. We didn't go inside. Many of them are locked up anyhow, but
So Bill, are you saying that it was commingled, Americans and Germans were buried there together?
no. It was occupied by the Germans, and the only American that I know was buried in there was Frank Luke. And it's marked specifically as to where he was buried. It was an organized burial that the I believe the Germans did, because oftentimes, unless the town was strafed, and you had battles going back and forth, it was left to the locals to bury the dead. But these were all identified graves in an orderly fashion. It's kind of funny, but the Quartermaster Corps, under its scope, is burial details and graves registration. And there's a very specific order on in an army manuals, and Bob might know this. What is the Army manual for burial and stuff? There's got to be some manuals for that. Anyhow, it tells you how to lay out a grave site, and then they'll be reinterred at some point in time.
I believe that's in the Ranger Handbook.
It is, yeah. Anyhow, this is a monument. It's up here. It says Memory of Frank Luke, United States Air Service. Remember, this was part of the Army, and it was until 1947. Balloon busting ace of World War I. Critically wounded, landed his SPAD, and it was a SPAD 8, 700 yards north, and was killed by German small arms fire on September 29th. Next picture should show you the field. Yeah. Where he landed was, I don't know if it was on this side or that side of where those trees are. At the low point, there's a little stream that runs through there. According to Don Luke, in a conversation I had with him, he said that he didn't deviate his escape route. He flew very low, and it went through the same area. And the Germans said, this is whatever bull pucky is in German. And so they put 2 machine gun nests up there and put kind of a V-fire pattern together so he would fly through it. He caught a round, a machine gun round in his side. It didn't kill him, but he landed his plane and he took out his revolver, which would have been a .45, and as the Germans tried to capture him, he shot at him, and then that's when he killed him. The 2 things that's kind of interesting on this one, when Germans captured a flyer, they treated him very, very well, because it was very unusual to capture a flyer. And if they'd known it was Frank Luke, it would have been a real attaboy, because they knew that he was around. He actually developed a technique at firing at balloons. You would think, a balloon, it's static. I mean, what's the problem there? They used a lot of artillery and machine gun fire to protect those balloons. So it was a death wish to go after a balloon. He actually shot down 14 of them, and then 4 enemy aircraft. The other thing is, when they come up on him, he didn't want to be captured, so he returned fire, and that's how his life ended. And then they buried him in the local cemetery. But one of the techniques that he used in downing balloons is that he would wait until dusk. Well, because you didn't have any instrument flying back in those times, you had to use your vision and whatever to get around and get back. He waited until dusk, so when they started pulling the balloons down, he would go after the balloons. And it did a couple of things. They were filled with hydrogen, which was highly flammable, so if they used any of those hot machine gun rounds, they could penetrate that balloon, catch it on fire, and actually it would kill a lot of folks, because it took, and there's pictures in the back of the room here that shows the amount of people that it took, energy-wise, to pull those balloons down. Now, the other thing that's kind of interesting, and it's kind of sad at the same time, parachutes were invented for pilots back in those days, because there's actually movies of German pilots that are bailing out of their aircraft into parachutes. Do you think we were issued parachutes? No. And the reason why we weren't issued parachutes is because the planes were so expensive that they wanted to make sure that there was every chance that you would save that aircraft before you saved your life. Now, if you protested, they instructed you to use your weapon to terminate your own life before you had impact.
Also, there was a weight factor too.
A weight factor?
Weight.
Okay. Well, those are all real good excuses if you're a pilot. So, next. You got it.
She wanted to say something.
I just wanted to say, I read a book, a couple of books really, on Frank Luke. And at that time, by the time he was killed, he was known as the Ace of Aces, and he was famous all over the world for his bravery and his skill in shooting down these balloons and planes. And he was the most famous pilot, and he had the most kills until after he died. And then Eddie Rickenbacker became the Ace of Aces. But who knows what more he would have done if he had not died on that September 29th.
We've got a picture of his commander, and remember, he and his commander, Frank Luke Jr.'s commander, had a very contentious relationship because he didn't want to take orders. Interestingly enough, his commander was the one who recommended him for the Medal of Honor that was received. But we've got some pictures up here, and I'll show them to you briefly that you're welcome to see. We're going to get them permanently mounted on boards with more of a history and a backup. But it's amazing the links between World War I and World War II. And if you think about it, many of the leaders, including Great Britain, and at the end of the war with Harry Truman, these were the leaders of World War II. And Hitler was one of them. And he was that paper hanging corporal, as one of our generals used to refer to him as. Is there another slide after this? Nope. That's the end of that, but I want to show you, I'm just going to hold these up so you can see them. Okay. These are going to be done on a board. They're going to be nicer than this. Actually, okay, who's that?
Pershing.
Okay, General Pershing. And if you notice, he does have a couple of ribbons on. He's pretty stern. When we got over there with all of our troops, what did the French tell General Pershing? They said, we have a nice office for you. Where are your troops? And you sit over here. And I think Black Jack, probably in very colorful language, said, it doesn't work that way.
Truman.
It's hard to tell who this is, but that's Harry S. Truman. And he was a captain in the artillery, and he wound up being at the negotiating table with Stalin. Who's this striking young man? Yeah, that's right. George was retired when World War II started, and he wanted to get back into it so badly. Okay, who's this gentleman on the left? That's right. And his dress uniform with his ribbons. Interesting how history kind of goes around and around there. Oh, Eddie Rickenbacker. There's her. With a smile. It's funny, but some of these folks were very successful in what they did during the war. But because of their heritage, if they had a German heritage, they were looked down upon. There was a lot of discrimination back in that time. This is hard to see. This is actually the commander of Frank Luke Jr. He doesn't look like a happy fellow anyhow.
I just thought of something else to tell you. We were lucky and fortunate enough to travel this last May to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio.
Outside of
Dayton. Thank you. Dayton, Ohio. And that's where Frank Luke's Medal of Honor is. And there's a group of 4 of them, and on the back-to-back with Frank Luke's is Eddie Rickenbacker's.
Now, he was a Medal of Honor. He was a Medal of Honor recipient also, but he didn't get his Medal of Honor till 1930. Okay, this is Bass Akron's here. I'll show you this here on your right, your far right. who can recognize who this fella is? Nope. This picture right here. Ty Cobb. And the reason why it's kind of important is if you look on his collar, he is actually a, we call it MBC, a chemical officer. It's the flask upside down, crossed. Who's that fellow? The plane's the giveaway.
Baron. The Red Baron.
Or the Red Baron, yeah. Baron says Baron. That's right, it's Red Baron. And he was killed during the war, and he was one of the few that I know that flew the tri-wing aircraft.
Right there. Fokker.
Yeah,
The Fokker.
okay. And then this actually is a picture, and I think there's another picture in the back of a balloon when it's going down. We use balloons too. More to get you. Just talk and then I'll be back.
Keep talking.
One thing, I was down at the Capitol building last, early in the summer, and there was a statue in front of our state capitol of Frank Luke Jr. The problem is that his birth year is wrong. It says 1898. He was born in 1897. And I went in there into the library in the Capitol building and I said, do you realize that the date is wrong on Frank Luke's statue? He didn't know and he didn't seem to care. But I did call the governor's office and I called the Phoenix mayor's office because Frank Luke was born in Phoenix. And like Bill said, they don't have any plans at that point. And I called back in August to see if they had anything planned for Frank Luke. They don't, not at that point. Or Luke Air Force Base even. So that's why we want to get this display for Luke Days. March 10th and 11th, everybody, 2018. Next March.
Okay, I'll have you hold this. She's my Vanna White tonight. Now, I don't expect you in the back to see this, but remember Sergeant York? Okay. And he was also decorated with a Medal of Honor in World War I. And yeah, nice picture of him in there. Anybody hear of Billy Mitchell? Okay, that's Billy Mitchell. And he looks like you don't want to cross a guy like that in a bar. Very highly decorated. He actually saw where Frank Luke had shot down a couple of balloons. They invited him. He was in charge of the air arm during World War I. So anybody that was a flyer over there, that's your top commander. This is a good picture. I told you, Frank didn't really fit in very well. If he didn't get credit for something that he actually did, he actually took the photographer with him, and he said, this is the plane that I shot down, and here's the body of the pilot that was in that aircraft. And he doesn't look very happy that he had to do that to prove that he shot him down. This I bring for an entirely different reason. Gee, that sounds interesting. Okay, I wanted to show you this picture here.
We're real pros at this, aren't we?
Sorry about that. This picture here, if you get a chance to look at it, we'll put it on the back table, was taken, and several of you are in this picture. The reason why I mention it is it's also a picture with Ed Heisler in it. Now, you remember the story that he told? He was 14 years old. Ed is the one in the purple shirt. Right there. He passed away on September 28th, and that's the reason why I bring that up. We record all of these sessions, and Sam does an excellent job. He puts them on Facebook, so you can go back and kind of recapture some of the stories they had. We've had 3 presenters who have left us. Perry Sartain was one. Unfortunately, passed away on December 7th in 2014, and Wanda has kind of had the burden of the ship ever since. Jack Nemiroff, I don't know if you remember Jack. Jack was our POW. And Korean POW went to 5 different camps, had a pretty long history there, and then Ed Heisler. Jack Holder's in that picture, and I know he's gone through some tough times, and I think he's around 96, if I'm not mistaken. Now, there's 2 people that are not here that normally come here, and actually Johnny would have been another one. And why don't you tell us, I'm sorry to throw this to you, I didn't prepare you on this. Talk a little bit about Leo and Carlos.
Well, Leo, he's still
Go ahead
fighting.
and stand up.
Leo is still fighting cancer right now. He's at 50-50. He's going through chemo. And, no, I'm fine. Hopefully everybody can hear me.
Yeah.
But he's still at 50-50. He's still going through chemotherapy. But he's doing pretty good. He would have been here tonight, but he had other plans, so. And Carlos, he was in the hospital in Tucson. He had cancer also, but his cancer was right behind his gallbladder. He spent 12 hours in the operating room. They had to cut it off piece by piece. That's why he was in there so long. When he finally, in fact, me and Leo went down to see him. We spent a couple of days out there with him, and with his wife and his daughter. So, anyway, he went home about 3 days after we left there, and he wound up with a bad infection. So they had to reopen him up again. So he spent a few days in the hospital, and now he's back home. And supposedly he's doing pretty good. So we're supposed to probably see him this weekend. We're supposed to get together, you know, usually we get together, have breakfast or have lunch somewhere, so. But they're all doing pretty good. And for Johnny, well, you know the story on that. So he died of a massive heart attack. And up to this day, I still miss him a lot.
Sure, and they went fishing together. And the reason why I bring it up is that life is fleeting, and that's the reason why we kind of hold these meetings and share with each other. Those presenters that were with us, record that, because there's no surety we're going to be here tomorrow. So, and Leo's been part of our group, driving group, so I'm missing both him and Carlos immensely. And Carlos, I remember, told me, and John Bickler, we were trying to get the trailer backed into the warehouse that has one of the trainers on it, and Carlos came over and he said, you know what, if you jack this wheel up real high, it'll be easier to move. And I said, I like that theory. And sure enough, we jacked it all the way up, put the weight toward the back, and it went right in. So, anyhow, you got to listen to your folks, and I really appreciate that. So, thank you. Thank you for sharing. That's about it. We do have a parade on the 28th. We've got some pictures in the back. Bob, Linda, Jerry, thank you for coming. Doc, good to see you here. I think the only other time we saw you is when you were doing your presentation.
I got the nights off, tonight off. What's the 28th?
It's a parade, local parade, Billy Moore Days. Guy was a criminal, but he established the community.
So celebrate.
Avondale.
So,
Avondale.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Bill. Happy birthday to you.
And this is our longtime friend Bob Ballou that was in OCS with Bill Knight back in, they graduated in 1977.
That's correct.
But
that's right.
Bob is kind enough to have a surprise for for Colonel Simon.
I do.
Mr. Bill.
And also we have cake from John. Unbeknownst to him, it's Bill's birthday.
it lasts, we We got a pretty good crowd here, so.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you. Sandy's already given our history. Back when we were young and Studley, we first met when we were in officer candidate school, and we've been fast friends ever since. Bill, we both retired from the Guard at the same time. We were at the same retirement party.
That's right.
But ever since then, you still haven't given it up. You founded the Frank Luke Jr. Museum, and you continue with your patriotism, and your influence has reached far and wide places. It has. My son, Brian, spent a tour of duty in the Middle East, serving our country over there. And while he was over there, he sent me a box with some stuff in it. And part of that stuff is in this brown paper bag. That it's a U.S. flag, but it's special. And Bill, you see it says First Lieutenant Brian Ballou,
Right.
and it's got your name on it.
That's correct.
All right. Open up the box. Now there's the flag, and I want to read this to everybody. Bill has included my son in some of his parades, one in particular, or more than one, maybe up in Munds Park. And and my son knows how good friends we are, and that we go way back. So I'm going to read this letter of authenticity for everybody. This certifies that the accompanying United States flag was flown over the 169th Field Artillery Brigade Headquarters, Camp Red Leg, Al Minhad Air Base, United Arab Emirates, on 21 July 2017 during combat missions in support of Operation Inherent Resolve and security cooperation missions in support of Operation Spartan Shield. For Lieutenant Colonel William Simon, Arizona Army National Guard retired, may it serve as a reminder of the dedicated members of the Colorado Army National Guard deployed throughout the United States Central Command Area of Operations. Signed, Edward C. Macias, Command Sergeant Major, Colorado Army National Guard Command Sergeant Major, and Robert B. Davis, Colonel, Field Artillery, Commanding. Thank you, Bill.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for this takes a little bit to put together, so I really appreciate the consideration and the appreciation. Yeah, we have used the young men in our parades, and it's titillating to the young women who attend the parades to see a man in uniform with a body fat level of less than 5%, which some of us will exceed. But I gotta tell you a quick story. When I was looking at the Safeway bag, I was wondering, what's in there? The first year that I came home from Korea, I had a bunch of stuff made up in Korea, and so we got home and opened the presents, and so they were just tickled to pink. Well, I also went to an exercise called Yamasakura in Japan. Well, Japan and Korea, Japan's very expensive, so I didn't buy a thing. But I wanted to provide more room to get home, so I put all my dirty underwear in the duffel bag and shipped it home. Well, when I got home, that bag was still not unpacked. And I had my wife and my two girls looking with smiles, and Daddy's got presents in there. And I had to gently break it to them that it's dirty underwear. Thank you all for coming and for our special guests.